This is the official tabletop version of Midway's PacMan.
They didn't just fade, they were quietly erased, like mixtapes left to melt in the sun while we blinked and moved on. What did we lose when the wild heart of the 1980s slipped through our fingers unnoticed? No one was safe from the mystery. Not your neighbor, not your teacher, not even your grandmother flipping through the channels with curlers in her hair. When J.R. Ewing was shot on the television show Dallas in 1980, America did not just watch, it obsessed. You could hear theories whispered in grocery store lines and argued over dinner tables. The suspense was unbearable, and it worked. The eventual reveal drew in over 80 million American viewers and over 350 million globally. For context, that is more than the Super Bowl, the moon landing, and most elections combined. Slogans like "A Democrat shot JR" actually made it into real-life political campaigns. But it was not just the question. It was what it represented. This was the first time American television turned into a psychological national sport. Everyone had a stake. It felt like losing a friend when it ended, and maybe that is why we let it slip from memory. Today, we scroll past cliffhangers in seconds. But back then, one slow burn mystery held an entire country hostage for months. That moment was not just television. It was America feeling something together. And maybe, just maybe, that is why it hurts so much to forget. August 1st, 1981. The screen turned black, then bright. A rocket launched, and suddenly music was never the same again. "Video Killed the Radio Star" echoed into living rooms across America, and MTV was born. But it did more than play music. It created a new kind of artist. Musicians were no longer just heard. They had to be seen, and not just seen, styled, staged, and sold like visual dreams. Madonna wore lace and crucifixes. Michael Jackson moonwalked into legend. And teenagers sat glued to their televisions like it was the only truth they had. This was the first time music had a face, and it changed everything. We did not just hear songs, we lived them. For a generation raised on radio, this felt like stepping into color for the first time. The music video era made icons out of mortals. It taught us that fashion could talk and that dance could sell a chorus better than a lyric ever could. It was commercial, it was loud, it was brilliant. And for one fleeting electric moment, MTV was more than a channel. It was culture, burning neon and beautiful in the dark. When did we stop watching music with our eyes? Before tablets, before streaming, before every show on earth was one click away. There was only one place to be on a Saturday morning. In front of the television, cereal in hand, pajamas still warm from bed. The screen would light up with the thunder of Thundercats, the roar of He-Man, the transforming crash of Autobots. These were not just cartoons. They were our best friends, our imaginary adventures, our emotional security blankets. For 2 golden hours, the world made sense. You cheered, laughed, and learned the kind of values that grown-ups forgot to teach: justice, teamwork, heroism, and most of all, fun. These shows were loud, animated love letters to a generation who needed a break from reality. And when the credits rolled and your mom called you to get dressed, it was like waking up from a dream. The ritual was so sacred, networks competed with one another like gladiators for your sleepy-eyed loyalty. Then, quietly, it all faded. Saturday morning cartoons disappeared, replaced by talk shows and infomercials. Now, we watch on demand, anytime we want. But it is not the same, because we did not just watch those shows, we waited for them. And in the waiting, we found something real. They were young, they were messy, and they looked just like us. The Brat Pack were not heroes or superheroes. They were teenagers who felt everything too hard and said it out loud. When you watched The Breakfast Club, it was not a movie. It was a mirror. These kids, Molly Ringwald, Emilio Estevez, Ali Sheedy, Anthony Michael Hall, they were your classmates, your crush, your quiet friend who wrote poems in the back of her notebook. They showed us that being misunderstood was not weakness. It was the most honest thing in the world. And America listened. These films made teenagers visible in a way no generation had done before. It was all there. The loneliness, the rebellion, the awkward crushes and silent pain. The Brat Pack did not just make films. They captured youth itself, wild and raw and unforgettable. They came, they burned, and then they vanished. The fame faded. The faces grew up. But the emotions, they still hit like a first heartbreak. In a world of curated youth and perfect filters, we forget what it felt like to be truly, painfully real. And maybe that is why those faces still haunt us in the best way. It was just a little old lady with a giant bun and a tiny hamburger patty. But in 1984, Clara Peller said 3 words that would shake the advertising world to its core. "Where's the beef?" she shouted, eyes narrowed, voice sharp. And suddenly the entire country could not stop repeating it. Wendy's had hit gold. This was not just a commercial. It was a cultural earthquake. It was parodied on late-night television, referenced in presidential campaigns, and printed on bumper stickers coast to coast. People were not just buying hamburgers. They were buying attitude. The ad turned fast food into theater and customers into critics. It questioned everything: value, honesty, expectations. And it did it in under 30 seconds. For a moment in time, a 3-word punchline became the nation's conscience. Then it faded, as all catchphrases do. But the genius of it stuck. We live in an era drowning in marketing, and still, no one ever quite topped Clara's gravelly challenge. The line is funny, sure, but it is also something more. It is a demand, a standard, a dare. In a world of hollow promises, maybe we are all still asking, where is the beef? It was small, square, and maddening. The Rubiks Cube took over the 1980s like a brainy little virus, impossible to solve, harder to put down. Originally invented in Hungary in the 1970s, it exploded into the United States like intellectual wildfire. Every school desk had one, every locker, every coffee table, and everyone thought they could beat it until they tried. It was not just a toy, it was a statement, a challenge, a social flex. Can you solve it? Was the question of the year. And if you could, you were royalty. Kids timed themselves, adults pretended not to be frustrated, and puzzle competitions became legitimate televised events. There was something deeper going on too. It was the Cold War, the space race, the computer age, and the Rubiks Cube fit right in. Order from chaos, logic over emotion. It felt futuristic, clean, brilliant. Then, slowly, it vanished from center stage. Too hard, too humbling, too analog. But those colorful little squares still sit in drawers, waiting to remind us of the strange joy in solving something impossible. Sometimes you do not need a screen. You just need 6 sides and a little bit of patience. You could hear it before you saw it, that cheerful blip-blip melody echoing from a darkened corner of the local arcade. Then you saw the screen. A little yellow circle with a hungry mouth chased ghosts in a neon maze, and just like that, the world changed. PacMan was more than a game. It was a full-blown epidemic. Kids skipped lunch to play it. Parents dropped quarters like candy. Radio stations played songs about it. There were t-shirts, breakfast cereals, and even a cartoon series. It was not just fun. It was addictive. And it did something almost no other game had done before. It welcomed everyone. You did not have to be into space battles or dragons. You just had to know how to move and survive. Simple. Genius. And for many, unforgettable. PacMan became the face of a new era, a digital era. The 1980s were the first time video games truly felt like culture, and this chomping little pixel creature led the way. As consoles took over and arcades faded, PacMan lost his spotlight. But the mark he left was permanent. He taught us that a game could be more than entertainment. It could be identity. When was the last time a circle made the whole world spin? You could not miss it. The Boombox was not just loud, it was a statement. Carried on shoulders like a badge of pride, it turned sidewalks into dance floors and corners into concerts. You did not just listen to music, you shared it. The bigger the boombox, the bolder the sound, and the bolder the person holding it. In the 1980s, music finally broke free from bedrooms and car stereos. It went public. It went mobile. Hip-hop was rising, and the boombox was its battle cry. Beats spilled into city streets, block parties lit up entire neighborhoods, and breakdancers spun on cardboard in the rhythm of rebellion. There was power in pressing play. It gave teenagers a voice, outsiders a spotlight, and artists an audience. But it was not all celebration. Noise complaints, curfews, police pushback. The boombox was controversial. Too loud, too urban, too new. Eventually, it faded into nostalgia as Walkmans took over, then CDs, then phones. Today, music lives in our ears, not on our shoulders. We stopped announcing what we loved to the world. But those who remember, remember. The sound, the swagger, the freedom. When did we decide our joy should be silent? By the power of Grayskull, you remember the rest. He-Man was not just a toy. He was a symbol of something bigger: fantasy, power, escape. In the 1980s, action figures did not just stand still. They had stories, real ones. Masters of the Universe was the first time kids got a full-blown animated saga wrapped around their plastic heroes. It was a marketing masterstroke, a show designed to sell toys that actually made you believe in the characters. Skeletor, Teela, Orko. They were not just sidekicks or enemies. They were your childhood companions. Every after-school episode felt like an adventure. You learned courage, honor, even self-worth, all before dinner. These were not simple toys. They were world builders. Your bedroom floor became Eternia, and your imagination had no limits. But eventually, they made way for flashier franchises, newer tech, and shinier packaging. He-Man was packed up in boxes, left behind with broken swords and dusty armor. But his impact never really faded. For one golden stretch of years, kids were the authors of epic tales, not just the audience. And in those stories, anything felt possible. Why did we stop handing power to the people? The screen flickered. You blew into the cartridge, and suddenly, magic. The Nintendo Entertainment System was not just a console, it was a resurrection. In the early 1980s, the video game industry had crashed hard. Too many bad games, too little trust. Then came Nintendo, sleek, gray, and unforgettable. It brought discipline back to design, quality back to gameplay, and joy back to living rooms. Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, Metroid, Duck Hunt. These were not just games, they were rituals. You did not play them, you lived them. The music stuck in your head, the secrets whispered on playgrounds, the hours you spent mastering pixel-perfect jumps. Nintendo created a language kids shared across the country, a shared dreamscape. It made nerds into heroes, siblings into teammates, and parents into confused spectators. And even today, the nostalgia runs deep. But it all started here, with a console that revived an industry and raised a generation. There was no internet, no patches, no downloads. Just you, the screen, and a controller with two buttons that somehow felt like a key to another world. When did play stop feeling like a portal? Michael Jackson did not just release an album. He changed the atmosphere. Thriller was not music. It was lightning caught in vinyl. From the moment that beat hit and Vincent Price whispered his haunted verse, you knew you were in a different world. Released in 1982, Thriller became more than the best-selling album of all time. It became the measuring stick for what pop music could be. The music video? It was a short film. Zombies, red jackets, moonwalks. It was terrifying, brilliant, and utterly unforgettable. And it proved that music could be cinematic, a full-body experience. Jackson's blend of pop, rock, and funk was daring, but his visuals were what made him immortal. He did not just perform, he possessed the stage. Every kid on the block tried the lean. Every radio played the album front to back. And when he danced on that sidewalk, the whole world watched. But over time, we stopped seeing just how big this moment was. Today's music feels disposable by comparison. Fast, shallow, forgettable. Thriller was not just a pop album. It was the last time the whole planet danced to the same rhythm. When did we stop making music that haunted us, in the best way? Madonna was not asking for permission. She was taking space. Big space. Space no woman had dared occupy quite like that before. When Like a Virgin hit the airwaves, it was not just a pop song. It was a dare, a mirror, a cultural detonation. In the 1980s, Madonna redefined what a woman in music could be. She was sexual, smart, and unapologetically loud. Her fashion made people stare. Lace gloves, layered crucifixes, fishnet tights. Every girl in the mall tried to look like her. Every parent feared she would corrupt their daughters. But Madonna was not just style. She was a movement, feminine, brash, and powerful. She broke the rules because the rules were not made for her. She made pop music into protest. Every hit came with controversy, and every outfit carried a message. Over time, people forgot that Madonna was not always accepted. She fought her way into the spotlight, and in doing so, she lit the path for every female artist who followed. Today, when boldness feels choreographed, it is easy to forget when it was dangerous. Madonna made that danger feel like freedom. When did we decide women had to behave to be respected? There was a time when walking into a room with big hair and broader shoulders was not a joke. It was a power move. The 1980s did not whisper. It roared. And nothing roared louder than a head of teased-up hair and a blazer that could poke someone's eye out. Volume was not just for radios. It was for your whole look. Women padded their suits to match men in the boardroom. Men sprayed their hair like rock gods and strutted down sidewalks like runways. Every silhouette was a billboard. I am here. You will notice. It was the decade of excess, and style reflected that hunger. Hair reached for the ceiling, shoulder pads touched the clouds, and for a brief moment, confidence had a uniform. It was not about subtlety. It was about stature. You looked big to feel big, and in a strange way, it worked. But trends fade, and now those old photos look like caricatures. But underneath the neon and aquanet, something real was happening. People were learning how to be loud without saying a word. We laugh now, but maybe what we lost was the bravery of standing tall, even if it meant stuffing your sleeves to get there. Before TikTok dances, before YouTube tutorials. There was a sidewalk, a stereo, and a kid spinning on cardboard like gravity had rules just for him. Breakdancing was not taught, it was born. From the cracked pavement of urban neighborhoods came something wild, fluid, and fearless. It did not ask for a stage, it made one. With every headspin, freeze, and windmill, breakdancers told their stories. No words, just rhythm, sweat, and defiance. It was not about money or fame, it was about respect, street cred, style. It started in the Bronx and echoed across the world. Suddenly, every town had a crew. Every school dance had a circle. You practiced until your elbows bled, because you had to nail that move. Then, slowly, it went mainstream. Adidas tracksuits, pop and lock TV specials. Corporate America tried to bottle the lightning. And while the world moved on to cleaner trends, the heartbeat of breakdancing never died. We forgot it for a while, like a song stuck at the bottom of a playlist. But for those who lived it, who felt the concrete scrape and the music hit, it was everything. When did we stop dancing like we had something to prove? It started with a beat. Just a beat. Then came a voice, fast and raw, slicing through the noise with something urgent to say. Hip-hop did not walk in. It kicked the door down. In the 1980s, artists like Run DMC, LL Cool J, and Grandmaster Flash turned street poetry into mainstream fire. It was loud, it was brilliant, it was terrifying to some, but it was real. For the first time, young black voices were not just speaking, they were being heard. Hip-hop was not just music, it was language, it was fashion, it was attitude. Kids traded records like sacred texts. They wore gold chains, shell-toe shoes, Kangol hats, symbols of pride and power. But this was not about style alone. These artists told stories no one else dared say aloud, about poverty, survival, anger, hope. The radio could not ignore it. The charts had to follow. Then the backlash came. People called it noise, dangerous, but that only proved its power. Decades later, hip-hop is global, but we forget how wild its beginning was. Back when it was not safe, not polished, just raw, brilliant truth over a beat. When did we stop listening like the message mattered? The sky was clear. The countdown echoed, then fire and silence. On January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded 73 seconds after launch. 7 crew members, including teacher Krista McAuliffe, were gone in an instant, live, in front of millions of watching eyes. It was supposed to be a triumph, a civilian teacher going to space, a hopeful symbol for a new generation. But instead, it became a national trauma. The explosion was not just tragic, it was visible, real, inescapable. Schools paused to watch. Kids saw it unfold in real time. The news replayed it again and again. And for the first time in the space age, awe turned into fear. America's faith in technology wavered. Optimism cracked. The Challenger disaster changed how we viewed science, government, and risk. It reminded us that progress is never guaranteed, and that even the brightest dreams can end in fire. Over time, the footage faded from television. New missions launched, but for one generation, that image never left. When did we stop believing the sky was a promise? It was not just a wall, it was a wound. For decades, Berlin stood divided, concrete slicing a city in half like a scar across the face of history. But in 1989, something changed. People gathered with hammers and hope. The wall fell, piece by piece, memory by memory. The Cold War did not end with a treaty. It ended with people chipping at tyranny by hand. And though it happened in Germany, Americans watched with their hearts in their throats. Ronald Reagan's voice still echoed, "Tear down this wall." And now it was happening. On live television, it felt impossible, unbelievable, hopeful. For a generation raised under nuclear dread, this was light breaking through a very long night. It was proof that division was not forever, that people together could rewrite the rules. Over time, the wall became a symbol, a relic. But we forget how real it was, how heavy, how brutal, and how miraculous its fall felt. In a world building new walls every day, we should remember the joy of watching one fall. When did tearing down feel braver than building up? They wore suits. They had cell phones the size of bricks. They drank wine they could not pronounce and read books they never finished. They were the Yuppies, young urban professionals, and they ruled the 1980s. These were not your tie-wearing fathers. They were fast, ambitious, unapologetically sleek. They jogged before meetings, closed deals during lunch, and bragged about how little sleep they got. Yuppie culture celebrated hustle, not as a necessity, but as a lifestyle. Success was not a goal, it was a vibe. Gordon Gekko said, "Greed is good," and people cheered. For a while, it felt like the dream was working. Young professionals in power suits filled glossy magazines. Cities glittered. Wall Street swelled. And underneath it all, anxiety simmered. Status was everything. Appearances were survival. And when the crash came, it came hard. But for a brief neon-blurred window, the yuppie reigned. Not just as a person, but as a symbol. Ambition with teeth, charm with claws. We mock them now, but they built the template for every influencer, startup founder, and LinkedIn humble bragger. When did we decide hustle was the new identity? It began with silence, then whispers, then fear. In the 1980s, the AIDS crisis arrived not with headlines, but with rumors, confusion, blame, and loss. People got sick, then vanished, and no one in power said a word. For years, it was ignored, misunderstood, stigmatized, But in the silence, something powerful happened. Communities, especially LGBTQ ones, rose up. They became activists, caregivers, scientists, fighters. ACTUP, marches, red ribbons, art and protest intertwined. The crisis birthed a movement, a painful, powerful rebellion against being forgotten. And slowly, the world listened. Science caught up, policy changed. But not before thousands were lost. The grief was immense, the anger sharper than any protest sign. Over time, AIDS became a page in history books, a red line in a health report. But it was, and is, more than that. It was a generation learning to demand dignity while dying, to demand love in the face of hate. When did we decide some lives were easier to ignore? You sat in a school assembly, barely awake. Then the projector clicked, and a serious voice said 4 words that defined an entire campaign. Just say no. Nancy Reagan's voice echoed in classrooms, on posters, even in cartoons. The message was simple: do not do drugs. But underneath the simplicity was a national panic. Crack cocaine was tearing through cities. Youth culture was changing. Parents were scared. So the government packaged morality into slogans and marched them into elementary schools. Songs, skits, mascots. Kids were told that drugs were evil, that friends could betray you, that one puff meant destruction. It was dramatic. It was heavy-handed. And for a time, it worked. Kind of. But over time, the message started to feel hollow. There was no nuance, no explanation, no help, just fear. And fear is not a policy. Still, for an entire generation, those 3 words are branded in memory. We can argue the effectiveness, but we cannot deny the reach. The Just Say No campaign was a cultural force, a time when the government spoke directly to kids. And some of us still hear that voice in the back of our heads. When did fear become our favorite teacher? They looked simple, a ball with a ring around it. But Pogo Balls were a battlefield disguised as a toy. Every kid in the 1980s knew the challenge. Step on, stay balanced, and bounce like your life depended on it. It was chaos, glorious, gravity-defying chaos. You did not just play with a pogo ball, you committed to it. Sprained ankles, worth it. Skinned knees, badge of honor. This was before hoverboards and scooters, before safety gear was mandatory and playtime was bubble-wrapped. Back then, toys demanded something from you. Courage, coordination, a little reckless spirit. Pogo balls turned driveways into launch pads and backyards into arenas. You'd compete for who could bounce the longest, jump the highest, or simply stay upright the longest. They were toys that punished hesitation and rewarded daring. And yeah, eventually they disappeared, replaced by shinier, safer, quieter things. But ask anyone who remembers. That feeling of liftoff, of losing control and loving it, never really left. We laughed, we fell, we bounced back. When did we decide play had to be safe to be worth it? They were grotesque, hilarious, and completely inappropriate. And we loved them. Garbage Pail Kids were trading cards with names like Barfin' Barbara and Up Chuck, each one a parody of the sweet, innocent Cabbage Patch Kids, only these were deformed, disgusting, and proud of it. They were banned from schools. Teachers called them a bad influence. Parents were horrified. But that only made us want them more. Kids swapped them like contraband. Entire recess periods were dedicated to ranking the grossest ones, the rarest, the most gloriously offensive. They were a rebellion in your pocket, proof that you were not buying what grown-ups were selling. Underneath the slime and snot, there was something radical going on. These cards mocked consumerism, perfection, conformity. They made fun of everything we were told to love and turned it into something we actually wanted. The art was detailed, the humor was crude, and the impact was undeniable. Eventually, the craze burned out and the cards were boxed away. But for one wild stretch of years, they were everything. They let kids be chaotic, weird, and subversive, and made them laugh while doing it. When did we stop letting kids have fun being a little gross? They squeaked. They stuck to your feet. They melted in the sun, and they were perfect. Jelly shoes, those translucent, glitter-filled plastic miracles, were the unofficial footwear of the 1980s. They came in every color: pink, purple, lime green, clear with gold sparkles. You wore them to the pool, to the park, to your cousin's birthday party. They were loud, they were weird, and they were magical. For a generation of kids, jellies were a fashion statement wrapped in childhood wonder. You were not trying to be practical, you were trying to shine. And shine they did. Literally. But they were not just about looks. There was something deeper. Jelly shoes made you feel like you were part of something. A tribe of bright, bold, sticky-footed dreamers. Sure, they made your feet sweat. Sure, they blistered. But they were worth it. Because for a while, they made ordinary days feel special. They turned sidewalks into runways and puddles into stages. Eventually, they vanished, replaced by sneakers and sandals that made more sense. But fashion rarely makes sense, especially when it means something. Jelly shoes were more than footwear. They were freedom, dipped in glitter. When did comfort start costing us our sparkle? It zipped, it snapped. It made you feel like your life was together, even if it was just full of doodles and detention slips. The Trapper Keeper was not just a binder. It was a flex. It said you had your act together, or at least looked like you did. With its Velcro flap and bold designs, think neon geometry, laser beams, pastel unicorns, it was the Ferrari of school supplies. Every kid wanted one. Some had matching folders. Others customized the inside with stickers, notes, or secret crush lists. Opening one felt like unsealing a vault of your private little world. It made organization feel cool, like you were plotting something important, even if it was just a spelling quiz. It was organization and self-expression rolled into one gloriously unnecessary package. Teachers tolerated them, parents questioned the price. But for kids, it was everything. You opened it with pride. You showed it off. And if someone had the same design, instant connection. The Trapper Keeper was social capital in paper form. Then schools banned them. Said they were too noisy, too bulky, too distracting. Maybe they were right, but maybe school needed a little more distraction. Today we live in a world of apps and cloud storage. But back then we had Velcro and a dream. When did staying organized stop feeling so fun? You did not buy them. You made them. And that was the whole point. Friendship bracelets were not about price tags. They were about time, effort, thought. Each knot told a story. Each color had meaning. And when you tied that final knot around someone's wrist, it meant something. It meant, I care. It meant, we're good. In the 1980s, these woven little bands were everywhere. Camp, school, playgrounds. You braided them during sleepovers. You exchanged them in secret. Some were messy and uneven, but that made them real. You could not buy the meaning. You had to tie it yourself. You wore them until they unraveled, because taking them off felt like betrayal. They were homemade tokens of love and loyalty, worn proudly like badges. No two were ever exactly the same. And that was the beauty of it. It was not about trends or branding. It was about connection. You gave a piece of yourself and hoped it would last. Today, friendship is measured in likes and texts. But back then, it was tied around your wrist, fraying with time but never forgotten. Some of us still have one tucked in a drawer somewhere, faded but whole. When did we stop weaving our feelings into something real? Some nights, it was the backyard. Other times, it was the town planetarium where the air smelled like metal seats and carpet glue. But either way, Dad made sure you always looked up. He would point at a blinking light in the sky and say something like, "That one's Venus," even if it was just an airplane. You believed him, because he said it with the same certainty he used when fixing the lawnmower. Sometimes he would bring out a telescope that never quite focused right, but it did not matter. You could see the moon, or at least a very bright blur that had to be the moon, and that was enough. He told you about constellations, meteor showers, and a comet he swore he saw when he was 12. The planetarium nights were just as magical. You would lean back in those creaky seats while the ceiling lit up with galaxies and a deep voice narrated the birth of stars. Dad would whisper facts like he had a PhD in astronomy, even if he probably read them from the brochure 5 minutes before. You did not go to learn. You went to dream. And the only thing better than dreaming about space? Digging through the universe of stuff at the local flea market the very next weekend. Stirrup Pants were the 1980s attempt to combine fashion with function, and they did neither particularly well. These leggings had a strap that looped under your foot, supposedly to keep them from riding up. In reality, they pulled awkwardly at your ankles, made your feet sweat, and caused socks to bunch in weird places. But we wore them anyway. They came in bright colors, bold patterns, and every synthetic material known to mankind. They were stretchy, shiny, and often paired with oversized sweaters or blazers that made no logical sense. From the knees up, you looked like a school principal. From the knees down, you looked like a gymnast caught mid-warm-up. But Stirrup Pants had their moment. They were the go-to outfit for school picture day, mall trips, or just feeling like you belonged in a fashion catalog. The loop under the foot made you feel oddly secure, like your pants were holding onto you. Sure, they sagged in weird places. Sure, they made your calves look like sausages. But they were a staple, loved, mocked, and deeply missed. For anyone who wore them, Stirrup Pants were more than a fashion choice. They were a commitment, a stretch of spandex, and a rite of passage. Wearing patches on clothes was less about style and more about grit. Holes in the knees, sewn shut with denim cut from old jeans, elbows wearing thin, covered in colorful scraps stitched with uneven lines and quiet determination. Every patch was a story, a game of tag gone too far, a tumble off a bike, a season of growth that stretched fabric past its limit. You did not throw things out, you fixed them. Because replacing a pair of pants was not always an option. Your mom had a sewing kit in an old cookie tin, filled with thread that never matched and buttons that had seen better days. She worked at the kitchen table, bent over your clothes like a surgeon, making something broken last just a little longer. You might have felt embarrassed. You might have tugged your sleeves to hide the stitching. But those patches were love in disguise. They meant someone cared enough to keep you dressed, even if the clothes were tired. They meant you kept going. Sometimes those patches were loud. Bright fabric that clashed with the shirt, a cartoon print stitched onto plain denim, whatever scrap was closest to the sewing basket. And sometimes they were nearly invisible, matched carefully to hide what had torn. Either way, you knew where they were. You could trace each one with your fingers. They scratched a little when new. They softened over time. On cold mornings, you sat still while your mom pinned a square over a frayed spot, asking you to hold your arms up or turn around so she could get it right. It was uncomfortable, but it meant you were cared for. No one wasted thread on clothes they did not plan to keep, and no one stayed up late mending knees if they did not believe you were worth the effort. Some patches covered wear and tear, others covered stains you could never quite get out. But all of them did the same thing. They gave your clothes a second life, and in the process, they gave you a quiet kind of dignity. You might not have had new clothes, but you had something better. Clothes that were saved, like you, again and again. And in a world where appearances mattered too much, patches were the proof that making do was still doing enough. You were worn, but you were whole. Walk into an old house and open a closet door, and you might get hit with a smell that is oddly comforting, woody, warm, a little spicy. That would be cedar, not a scent diffuser, not a spray. Actual cedar wood, lined across the walls of the closet from top to bottom. These cedar-lined closets were the silent guardians of America's wardrobes. They protected against moths, mildew, and musty smells. But they also added a kind of rustic luxury, like storing your clothes inside a tree trunk at a high-end cabin. The idea was simple. Cedar wood naturally repels insects, so why not turn your entire closet into a bug-proof haven? People did not just store coats in there, they kept heirlooms, wool suits, and seasonal clothes safe year-round. Some closets were fully lined, others just had a single cedar panel on one wall. Either way, it gave the whole room a spa vibe long before that was a thing. These days, you might see cedar blocks or hangers sold in stores, but entire closets made of the stuff? That has faded into the woodwork, literally. The world got synthetic and the cedar charm became a relic. But if you think that was clever, wait until you see how people used to pass food across rooms without ever leaving their chair. The Firehouse Pancake Breakfast was not just a fundraiser, it was a local holiday. Dad would wake you up early on a Sunday, say, "Put on your shoes." And before you could ask questions, you were in line behind a dozen people all craving the same thing, a plate piled high with pancakes. The folding chairs wobbled, the long tables had little dents and permanent syrup rings, and everything smelled like melted butter and maple sugar. Real maple syrup was a luxury, so they used the bottled kind, the kind that came out slow and stuck the lid shut like glue. Firefighters in aprons manned the griddles, flipping pancakes like they had trained for it. Dad would nod in approval, pile his plate, and crack a joke to someone in line about how this was the real breakfast of champions. Dad never won, but he always bought 5 tickets just in case. It was not about the pancakes, really. It was about community, about showing up. And when breakfast was over, he would say, "Let's make a stop on the way back." That stop? Usually a roadside museum with one very questionable claim to fame. Neon everything was not a trend. It was a takeover. Shirts, socks, shoelaces, scrunchies. If it could be worn, it could be neon. Bright pinks, electric greens, yellows so vivid they could stop traffic. Walk into a classroom in the 1980s, and you might see a dozen students glowing like highlighters. It was not subtle. It was not sophisticated. But it was unforgettable. Neon made sure you were seen from across the street. Or the roller rink. Entire outfits were built around one blinding shade. And the braver kids? They mixed them. A neon blue shirt with neon orange shorts and lime green shoelaces. Why not? Matching was optional. Visibility was everything. Neon told the world you were loud, proud, and unbothered by what anyone else thought. It showed up in birthday parties, aerobics tapes, and mall photo booths. Looking back now, it seems like a color explosion. But that was the magic. Neon was confidence in color form. It was youth, amplified. It was chaos, celebrated. And for those who wore it without a hint of irony, it was the brightest part of a decade that refused to dim. DIY haircuts at home were a gamble wrapped in a towel and held together by hope. The kitchen turned into a salon. A dining chair became the barber's throne. Mom or dad grabbed the dullest scissors in the drawer and told you to sit still. You did. Kind of. And snip by snip, your identity changed. Bangs went crooked. Sideburns vanished. One side always ended up shorter. They tilted your head like that would help. You watched the clumps fall, hoping for the best. Sometimes it ended in tears. Sometimes in laughs. But most often in silence and a baseball cap. You went to school the next day pretending nothing happened. But everyone knew. They always knew. DIY haircuts were not about style. They were about saving $20 and making it stretch. Hair grew back. Groceries did not. So you endured the bowl cuts, the buzz jobs, the too short layers that stuck out like antennas. You got used to it. And after a while, it became normal. A family ritual, a budget tradition. Looking back, those crooked cuts carried more than just uneven lines. They carried effort, sacrifice, and a strange kind of love that you only see when the hair starts to grow in. Boombox battles turned sidewalks into stages and backpacks into speaker cabinets. In the 1980s, carrying a massive boombox on your shoulder was more than a way to listen to music. It was a declaration. You had style, you had taste, and you had batteries heavy enough to power a small city block. These machines blasted everything from hip-hop to hair metal, and they did not ask for permission. You walked down the street with your soundtrack trailing behind you, volume all the way up, head nodding to the beat. Some kids parked them at basketball courts. Others lined them up outside corner stores. Whoever had the best bass usually won the crowd. Tapes were traded, dials were turned, and sometimes spontaneous dance-offs broke out right there on the pavement. Boomboxes were heavy, awkward, and impossible to ignore. But in a time before smartphones and Bluetooth, They were portable pride. They made noise. They made statements. And if you saw someone approach with a fresh cassette in hand and a boombox on their shoulder, you knew something good was about to happen. Boombox battles were not just about the music. They were about being seen, heard, and remembered. Radio Shack. You did not go to Radio Shack to shop. You went there to touch. The moment you walked through the door, it was like stepping onto a spaceship. Racks of wires, batteries, and gadgets you had never even heard of. And in the middle of it all, the demo table, a flashing, beeping paradise. Dad would say, "We're just browsing," but an hour later, he was still pressing buttons, turning knobs, and pretending he was building a satellite in the garage. You would find the mini keyboard and try to play "Mary Had a Little Lamb" while he talked tech with the teenage clerk behind the counter. Every once in a while, he would point at something and say, "I had one of these back in college," even if he definitely did not. He would pick up a transistor radio, weigh it in his hand like a jeweler inspecting a rare gem, and give a long, low whistle. Solid piece of work. He never bought anything over $20, but you always walked out feeling like you had been part of a NASA mission. If imagination had a store, it was that one. And right around the corner from that tech wonderland, a pet store where you begged and somehow always walked out with something in a plastic bag. Shoulder pads were not just a trend, they were a transformation. You could put on a blazer and suddenly feel like a corporate warrior, even if you were just headed to homeroom. The goal was to look powerful, confident, and vaguely like a football player on a job interview. From business suits to casual blouses, shoulder pads invaded every piece of clothing in the 1980s. You could not escape them. They were sewn in, velcroed on, or added as an afterthought to make your silhouette scream important. The bigger the pad, the better. Entire generations walked around with squared-off shoulders and structured poise, looking ready to charge into a boardroom or a runway. Some tried to remove them only to realize the entire shirt deflated without the padding. They were ridiculous, and we knew it. But they worked. You stood a little taller, felt a little braver, and if someone bumped into you in the hallway, your outfit absorbed the blow. Looking back now, they seem comically oversized, but at the time, they were armor, fashion armor. And for anyone who wore them, they were a reminder that style was not just about looking good, it was about looking like you meant business. Limited or no air conditioning meant summer nights were a battle with the heat. The box fan sat in the window, humming like a tired engine, barely moving the thick air. You sweated through your sheets, drank warm water, slept with the lights off and the windows wide open, hoping for a breeze that never came. Some homes had one window unit, and it stayed in the living room. Everyone gathered there like refugees from the sun. No one moved. The couch was soaked in humidity. Tempers flared, ice trays emptied fast. You wore as little as possible, stuck your head in the fridge, and counted the hours until dark. At school, kids talked about central air. You could not imagine it. The idea of a whole house being cool felt like science fiction. You made popsicles out of juice in ice cube trays. You wrapped wet washcloths around your neck. You laid on the floor, hoping the tile was cooler than the bed. And through it all, you survived. Uncomfortable, sticky, and half asleep, but alive. No air conditioning was not ideal, but it made you tough, and it taught you how to endure heat, not just in your house, but in life. And if you think delivering milk through a wall sounds wild, wait until you hear about the homes that were designed for smoke. Back in the middle of the 20th century, smoking was not just accepted, it was expected, and American homes were ready for it. That is where built-in ashtray stands came in. These were not just ashtrays placed on coffee tables or countertops. No, these were recessed, often permanent fixtures embedded right into walls, armrests, and even lampstands. You could walk into a living room, and there it was, your own little designated smoke spot, classy as could be. Some were ceramic, some were chrome. A few even had lids to keep the ashes tidy. And they were everywhere, in kitchens, in bathrooms, in bedrooms. The ultimate sign of a home that was with it. Even guests had their own designated ashtrays. People took pride in them. Some were decorative, shaped like seashells or horseshoes. Others were sleek and utilitarian, and it was not just adults using them. Teens had their own, often built into the back of desks or vanities. Today, of course, the idea seems almost alien. We cover smoke detectors in foil just to cook without setting them off. But back then, these ashtrays were part of the home's soul. And when the culture shifted, they vanished fast, ripped out, tiled over, or collecting dust as relics of a time no one wants to remember, but no one can forget. But the next room? Oh, that is where the real memories were made. Think beanbags, shag carpet, and absolute chaos. The community swap meet in the church parking lot was a patchwork quilt of folding tables, lawn chairs, and a whole lot of neighborhood hustle. It was always held early, way too early, and Dad would pull up with a thermos of coffee and a plan. This was not a place for big spenders. This was a battlefield of bartering. He would go straight to the tables stacked with transistor radios, old tools, and that mysterious plastic bin full of tangled cords that might be useful someday. You were eyeing the table with the mismatched action figures and board games missing all the pieces. There was always one guy who sold nothing but velvet Elvis paintings. No one ever saw him set up or pack up. He was just there. The swap meet had its regulars. The Tupperware lady with 1,000 lids and no matching containers. The comic guy who only sold back issues from 1974. And the woman with jars of jelly that looked more suspicious than sweet. But Dad? He moved through it all like a seasoned pro, chatting with everyone like they were old buddies, walking away with something bizarre like a minifan or a set of ceramic pigs, and when he said, "Let's stop by the junkyard real quick," you knew things were about to get even stranger. Slap bracelets were the toy that hit your wrist and hit peak popularity, almost overnight. They were simple. A metal strip wrapped in colorful fabric that snapped around your arm with one satisfying motion. One moment it was straight, the next it curled tight, clinging to your wrist like a coiled snake. Every kid had one. Some had dozens, trading them like currency during recess. They came in neon colors, animal prints, sparkles, and cartoon characters. The louder the snap, the better. Some kids got so good they could slap them onto their arms without looking. But with popularity came problems. Schools started banning them. Parents worried about the metal underneath. Rumors flew about kids cutting themselves open with a rogue bracelet that had been peeled apart. That only made them cooler. Everyone wanted the forbidden accessory. Teachers tried to confiscate them, but they always found their way back into backpacks and onto arms. Slap bracelets were fun, fast, and a little dangerous, just enough to feel rebellious. They were not just toys. They were fashion statements, fidget tools, and tiny thrills rolled into one. And even now, the sound of that sharp snap is enough to take you right back to 4th grade. Reliance on government assistance programs was not a choice. It was the only way to get by. Food stamps came in paper booklets, torn out in the checkout line with quiet hands and sideways glances. School lunches were free, but they came with their own kind of price. Standing in a separate line, hearing the whispers, seeing the looks. You carried a different card, a different meal, a different kind of burden. The people behind the counter never said anything. But you knew. Everyone knew. At home, government cheese filled the fridge. Powdered milk sat on the shelf. The pantry was stocked with cans stamped from surplus stores, beans, peanut butter, cereal that tasted like cardboard but kept you full. Your parents made it stretch. They made it work, and they told you to hold your head up even when you wished you could vanish. Because pride does not feed a family. Assistance was not shameful, it was survival. It was how your shoes fit, how your stomach was full, how you still made it to class with something in your bag. And though some days it felt heavy, it also meant someone, somewhere, knew you were worth helping. Even when the world made you forget. Back in the days when phones had cords and privacy was a privilege, every hallway had a throne, and it was called the gossip bench. This was not just a chair. It was a hybrid masterpiece, a small wooden seat attached to a side table, designed specifically for long, dramatic phone calls. These benches were often placed right by the hallway phone nook, and if you were a teenager in the 1960s or 1970s, this was your favorite spot in the house. You would sit there for hours, twirling the phone cord, whispering about crushes, repeating, "No, you hang up," while your siblings paced in the background waiting for their turn. Some benches had a little drawer for pens and paper. Others had cushions and floral fabric, showing just how serious folks were about comfort during those marathon chats. It was furniture that served one purpose: conversation. But as phones got smaller, and then wireless, and then fit in your pocket, the gossip bench faded away. Today, they are vintage novelties. Back then, they were the nerve center of the household. And while you chatted away about school dances or new neighbors, something else might have been happening overhead. Quietly, from the ceiling, playing your favorite song. Imagine this. It is Sunday morning. You are eating breakfast, and faintly from above your head comes the sweet hum of big band music or the evening news. The dairy farm drive-thru felt like something out of a storybook. You did not get out of the car. You just rolled forward slowly on a gravel path that crunched under the tires like popcorn, while the smell of hay and cream filled the air. Wooden signs pointed the way. Milk, cream, eggs, and sometimes fresh butter today. Dad would pull up to the window, nod at the farmhand, and exchange a couple of glass bottles like they were precious cargo. You could hear them clinking together softly in the metal crate behind the seat, already cold with condensation. If you had been on your best behavior, meaning no backseat bickering and no complaints during the wait, he would ask the real question, "You want a cone?" It was always a yes. The scoop was big, the cone was soggy by the time you were halfway through, and somehow it still tasted like heaven. Sometimes Dad would get one too and say, "Best $2 I ever spent." And as the cows in the distance mooed lazily and the sun painted gold across the field, you realized simple things could feel grand. But if you think that was charming, just wait until you step inside the used bookstore that sold both dusty novels and ham radios whispering from across the country. Giant scrunchies were not just hair ties, they were statements. Big, bold, and often made of velvet or shiny satin, they wrapped around ponytails like fabric donuts. One was never enough. Some girls stacked them. Others coordinated them with earrings, shirts, or shoelaces. You might even wear one on your wrist, just in case your hair needed managing at a moment's notice. They came in every color of the rainbow and every pattern imaginable. Leopard print? Check. Neon green? Of course. Polka dots the size of your thumb? Why not? Scrunchies were soft, gentle on your hair, and perfect for the sky-high ponytails the 1980s demanded. Some had sequins, some had bows. All of them made your hair look like it was ready to host a party. You could spot a scrunchie from across the school cafeteria. It bounced when you walked and made even the messiest bun look intentional. Looking back, they seem oversized and silly, but that was the point. Scrunchies were playful, practical, and loud in the best possible way. And even though they disappeared for a while, anyone who wore one back then knows, you never really outgrow the joy of tossing your hair into a cloud of fabric. Furniture from thrift stores or curbside finds gave homes that mismatched charm only necessity could create. A sagging couch from someone else's garage sale. A wobbly coffee table rescued from the sidewalk. Chairs with mismatched legs or beds with slats that creaked under every turn. This was what made a living room feel lived in. There was no delivery truck, just a neighbor with a pickup, or a slow push down the block with a dolly borrowed from Uncle Joe. You sprayed it down, you wiped it twice, and you made it yours. Some pieces were covered in throws to hide the rips. Others leaned against the wall to stay upright. But they had character, stories, a past you never asked about. In kitchens, the table might have a burn mark or a dent from years of use, but it still held dinner. In bedrooms, dressers groaned when you pulled the drawers, but they closed eventually. New furniture was for people with money. For everyone else, you took what you could get, and you were thankful for it. Because when money was tight, having something, anything, to sit on was a win. You did not care how it looked. You cared that it worked. Bathroom incinerators were exactly what they sound like. Tiny metal boxes installed near the toilet, designed to burn trash right on the spot. Sounds efficient, right? Maybe. But also, just a little bit terrifying. These units were popular for a short time in the mid-20th century, mostly in homes that were obsessed with cutting-edge convenience. They were meant for tissues, cotton balls, wrappers, and small bits of waste, not, let us be clear, diapers or anything major. You would flip a switch, hear a low hum, and then wait while your trash slowly vanished into ash. It was like having a personal bonfire inside your bathroom. Some even came with a little chimney that vented outside. Of course, the smell was something. And safety? Let's just say it was a different time. These machines were prone to overheating, and if you put the wrong thing in, you might get more flames than you bargained for. Eventually, people realized that trash cans and weekly pickups were a whole lot safer, so the bathroom incinerator quietly disappeared, along with the era of lighting your garbage on fire next to your shampoo. But while the bathroom was heating up, the beauty routines of the day were getting pretty cool. And I mean that literally. Just wait until you see the hairdryers. If one of these memories hit home, drop it in the comments, tap like, and subscribe to keep the past alive.